Roguelike is a cursed genre. At its core, there's just a bunch of randomness, and this makes it incredibly difficult to design. However, top game designers have perfected working with randomness rather than against it, and I'm going to show you the 3 ways how, and then their secrets on how they hack the player's mind. The first major trick designers use is called skill-based mitigation. Randomness in of itself is just a string of numbers. It's basically a bunch of noise, and players can't do anything with that. However, if you build relationships between those random outputs, suddenly our brain loves it. Let's give an example. Here's a random group of foods. Altogether, these don't mean anything, but our brain inherently loves to group these foods together. For example, desserts, lunch, and breakfast. However, the genius of roguelikes is that they take this concept even further. Sure, you can group them like this, but you can also group it by flavors, or colors, or by healthiness. This sort of pattern recognition has a term in game design: synergies. The difficult thing about this is that designers have to make different weapons or cards in order to create these synergies, and all of these needs to be balanced somewhat. Not all cards are necessarily created equal. For example, Megacrit intentionally designed some of the cards more powerful than others in Slay the Spire. These are the types of cards that you build your deck around. So when you go to draw a random set of cards, your choice will more likely be influenced to a deck starter card, or to one that synergizes with your other cards. By enhancing patterns, randomness no longer becomes noise, it can be clustered. So for roguelikes, the skill you gain over play is from learning the synergies, which mitigates the randomness. But it is also learning what you might be up against. In the roguelike Nine Kings, there are different kingdoms, each with different cards. As you play the game, you start to learn what to expect from the kingdoms you go up against, and you can start to become more skilled. But what if the player gets a kingdom with cards they don't want? That's where our second, often overlooked, yet crucial trick comes into play: player-influenced RNG. This is all about letting players make the choices in order to win. Think of it like this: if you roll a dice in Snakes and Ladders, it's completely up to chance on where you'll end up, which can make a player feel out of control and extremely frustrated. But if you add 2 paths a player can take instead, suddenly it becomes a choice the player has to make. If you extrapolate this idea out to the whole game, now you're making choices at any given moment. Which card should you pick? Should you reroll? Should you spend this money to buy this upgrade? And so on. Adding in lots of choice changes the dynamics away from a game of randomness into a game of strategy. However, to make any choice, the information you give the player or don't give the player has to actually be meaningful. For example, in Slay the Spire, the player has a random map with paths they can choose. Maybe they want to rest, or go for more enemies, or get more loot. Whatever they choose is impacted based on various factors, like the player's health, their money, power, etc. So whilst the map is random, the choice they make is not because of the information given. Now these are examples of being given something random and then making a choice. But randomness can also come after you make a choice, and that carries a whole different set of interesting problems. An example of this is in Armello. Here, you can choose to get even better loot, or continue with the regular loot. If you choose to try for better loot, there's a chance that you might end up with nothing, or even worse, a punishment. So basically, a high risk, high reward coin flip. But again, Armello's designers ensured that the player could see the probability transparently and plan based on the data given. Games like Vampire Survivors actually take this player-influenced RNG to the next level. Here, they allow you to directly affect the luck stat, which leads to even more player agency, allowing players to feel like they've cheated somehow. But what say if your luck is just not lucking out? This is where limited rerolls comes in handy. Basically, if you've got a bad deal, you can reroll for loot you actually want, allowing you to try your luck again, so you never feel incredibly hard done by. That being said, designers don't make it that easy for you. If you could infinitely reroll, there would be no stakes or informed strategy, just building the same synergy that you know works over and over again. So rerolls essentially act as a resource you need to manage. If you reroll now, that's one less reroll you have later when you might need it even more. Now this third tip is one of the main reasons that the roguelike genre is so incredibly replayable. Okay, so the benefit of having randomness at the core is that it becomes infinitely more replayable. Every run will naturally be different, so the player has to change strategies and learn new ways to win, but eventually even that will run its course. That's why designers use meta progression. These are the stats and rewards you unlock from achievements from playing the game, or via upgrades from the in-game economy. For example, in Vampire Survivors, you have perma upgrades, or characters and maps you unlock that give the game a fresh new challenge. In Balatro, this is the new jokers allowing for different synergies, or their new starting decks, forcing you to change the strategy entirely. The benefit of these approaches is that it forces the player to learn the game and conquer it before being able to conquer it again with the new tech they've unlocked. Essentially, it acts as an extended tutorial. I mean, Vampire Survivors, for example, doesn't even have a tutorial. As you play the runs though, you learn new tech, and thus you progress. But here's the tricky thing about roguelikes. What actually makes a player want to progress and play over and over again? What actually makes these games so insanely addictive to our brains? And why do players crave more gameplay from roguelikes? First, I want you to imagine a scale. On one end are games that require tons of skill. Think Souls-like games, like Dark Souls. And then, on the other end of the scale, you have random games that require no skill whatsoever. These are basically gambling games. The key to a viral, replayable game is to try and design it as close to gambling without it actually being gambling. With roguelikes, they kind of fit here on the scale. This is the magic zone for an addictive, replayable game, without it actually being gambling. And actually, the reason it's so addicting can be boiled down to 3 key ingredients. Number 1 is reward systems. Basically, this is all the feedback that the player gets from the game that releases dopamine in our brains. Think ever-increasing numbers, flashy VFX, sound effects, tactile motion, whatever. Things that give a juicy reward when players do some set of inputs. Meta progression is also considered a reward system, so the short-term moment-to-moment rewards for things like beating enemies actually leads to big rewards, like unlocking new weapons. This already creates an insanely addictive gameplay loop, but pairing that with number 2 makes this potent, and that is through emotional investment. Imagine this, you've been invited out to the horse races with some friends, and you don't know any of the horses. You decide to bet on, I don't know, Blue Champion because you like the color blue. Now, suddenly, you're cheering Blue Champion on, despite never having cared about the horse race before. But since you made a choice, you now become more invested. The same logic applies to roguelikes. When a player is dedicated to building up their synergistic deck, they become emotionally invested because that's a choice they've made. Now, the last reason roguelikes are so addictive is because of a careful balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is a goal you come up with, whereas extrinsic motivation is a goal you are told to go for. For a game, extrinsic goals might be a score barrier you need to beat, or an achievement you need to unlock. Intrinsically though, the player is motivated to try out a new strategy or synergy in order to progress further. This careful balance means that the player is never left without a goal, so there's always more for them to try and achieve. So to sum up, the roguelike design curse is having to balance strategy and randomness. However, if balanced correctly, this randomness can actually work in its favor, creating an insanely addictive gameplay loop through rewards, choices, and goals, where you're trying new synergies, learning new strategies, and unlocking even more powerful rewards. Now that you know how to make a game that rewards you from luck, how about something that does the complete opposite? I just did a video talking about the unorthodox design of those rage games all the top streamers are playing. If you want to learn how to hack a player's brain, you need to check out that video here.